In the heart of the city, where glass towers touched the clouds, Thomas Royce walked through the corridors of his empire. He was a millionaire, proud of every success, every deal, every expensive suit he owned. People admired him, feared him, or both. Thomas liked it that way. Power, money, and control were the things that mattered to him most. The office was quiet now, almost empty. The hum of air conditioners and the occasional ringing of phones filled the space. He looked around, his sharp eyes taking in the shiny floors, the polished desks, and the employees who worked silently, typing reports or answering calls. Yet in the corner of the building, away from the glass and steel, someone worked quietly, almost invisible. Harold. He was a black man in his late 50s. His hair sprinkled with gray, wearing a simple janitor uniform. He moved with careful, deliberate steps, sweeping floors, wiping desks, and cleaning the small messes no one else noticed. Most people barely acknowledged him. Harold had worked in this building for over 20 years, quietly doing his job, rarely complaining, and always keeping a smile for those who passed by. On that particular afternoon, Thomas noticed Harold sitting alone in the break room, eating from a small, worn-out tin box. The smell of rice and beans drifted faintly in the air. Thomas raised an eyebrow, his lips curling into a smirk. "That's what you eat, Harold," he said loud enough for some employees nearby to hear. "Looks cheap, and not very appetizing if you ask me." Some employees tried to hide their smiles, awkwardly glancing away. They knew Thomas could be cruel when he wanted to be. Harold looked down at his lunch. His fingers gripped the edges of the tin box. He felt a sting deep and quiet, a pain he had learned to hide over decades, but he didn't respond. He had long ago mastered the art of silence, knowing that arguing with Thomas would bring nothing but trouble. Instead, he gave a small nod, quietly muttering, "It keeps me going, sir." Thomas laughed, a sharp, mocking sound that echoed against the walls. As Thomas turned to leave, he shook his head, thinking about the gulf between them. Harold lived in a small apartment, had little to his name, and probably spent his nights worrying about bills. Thomas, on the other hand, had yachts, cars, and homes that could fill a city block. In his mind, that gave him the right to judge. "Some people are just born for mediocrity," he muttered to himself. But Thomas did not know the truth behind Harold's lunch. He didn't know about Maya, Harold's daughter. She was a young woman with a warm heart, recently returned home after studying culinary arts. Maya loved cooking, not for fame, not for money, but to show love. Every morning she woke up before dawn, preparing meals with care and precision. She packed them in a small tin box for her father, making sure he had a hot, nourishing lunch for the long workday ahead. Each grain of rice, each carefully seasoned bean, each piece of grilled chicken was made with love. Harold had never told anyone this. To him, it was not about impressing the wealthy or proving anything to anyone. It was about love, a quiet, private love between a father and daughter that no one else needed to understand. And yet, as Thomas walked away, laughing quietly to himself, he had no idea that the cheap lunch he mocked carried more love and care than all his money combined. After Thomas left, Harold opened his tin box a little wider, inhaling the aroma of the meal. He smiled softly to himself, remembering Maya's laugh as she handed him the lunch that morning. "You're going to do great today, Dad," she had said. Harold held that thought in his heart. No matter how harsh the world could be, no one could take away that love. And as he finished his lunch, savoring each bite quietly, he knew that sometimes the simplest things held the greatest power. Little did Harold know that small lunch quietly made with love would soon teach the proud millionaire a lesson he would never forget. The next morning, Harold woke up before the sun. The city was still quiet, with only the faint hum of early traffic outside his small apartment window. He stretched and yawned, careful not to wake anyone, and quietly walked to the kitchen. There, the small tin boxes sat neatly on the counter waiting to be filled. But Harold didn't prepare them himself. That was Maya's job. Maya was already in the kitchen, her hair tied back, her hands moving skillfully. She hummed softly as she chopped vegetables and seasoned chicken. Her face glowed with a warmth that seemed to light up the small, modest apartment. She loved cooking. But more than that, she loved the thought of making her father happy. "You'll be late if you don't hurry," she said softly. Noticing Harold stretching in the doorway, he smiled, a tired but grateful smile. "I'll manage." "I always do." Maya shook her head and laughed. "Not when I'm taking care of you," she said. She carefully layered rice in the tin, added beans, and placed a small piece of perfectly grilled chicken on top. Every little detail mattered to her. She even added a tiny sprinkle of herbs, knowing her father would notice and smile. "You really think he notices?" Harold asked quietly, watching his daughter with pride. Maya smiled. "Of course he does. He may not say it, but he knows. Every meal I make, every little touch, it's my way of telling him I love him. That's more important than money, more important than anything else in this world." Harold nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. He had spent years working tirelessly, cleaning offices, mopping floors, scrubbing walls, always invisible to the rich people around him. But Maya's love reminded him that no matter how small or unnoticed his work seemed, he mattered to someone who loved him deeply. With the lunch packed, Harold kissed Maya on the cheek. "Thank you, Maya, you always make my day better," she grinned. "Don't thank me. Just promise me you'll enjoy it." He chuckled softly. "Every bite. Always." Later at the office, Harold quietly took his place in the corner, opening the tin and smelling the food. The aroma of the meal was comforting, a reminder of home, of love, of something pure and untouched by the harshness of the world. He ate slowly, savoring each bite, tasting the effort and care that Maya had put into it. Meanwhile, Thomas Royce walked by, his expensive shoes clicking against the polished floors. His eyes caught the small tin again. He smirked, leaning slightly to glance at Harold's lunch. "Still eating that, Harold?" He sneered. "You really enjoy that, huh? Looks cheap." Harold looked down, not angry but calm. "It's perfect for me, sir," he said quietly, keeping his voice steady. But inside he felt the familiar sting of ridicule. He thought about Maya, about her careful hands and the love she put into that simple meal. He remembered her smile that morning, the words she had whispered, "I love you, Dad." In that moment, Harold realized that Thomas's opinion meant nothing. The love in that lunch was more powerful than any insult, more meaningful than any judgment. And though Thomas didn't know it, that lunch carried a secret strength, an invisible shield of love that protected Harold from the loneliness and scorn he sometimes faced. As the day went on, Harold noticed Thomas walking past him repeatedly, glancing at the tin, shaking his head, muttering quietly to himself. Harold tried not to pay attention. He knew Thomas could never understand what that lunch truly meant. It wasn't about appearance. It wasn't about money. It wasn't even about taste. It was about love, care, and connection, the kind of things that Thomas, with all his wealth, had never truly felt. And somewhere deep inside, Harold felt a quiet pride. He was invisible to the world, yes, but not to Maya. She had reminded him in the smallest, most beautiful way that he mattered. That lunch, humble as it seemed, was a message of love stronger than any fortune, louder than any insult, and brighter than any office tower. Harold ate the last bite and closed the tin, a small, satisfied smile on his face. He was ready for the day, ready to sweep floors, empty trash, and make the office shine, because no matter what anyone thought, he carried something far richer than money, a daughter's love wrapped in a small tin box that gave him the courage to face the world. Little did Harold know, Thomas's mockery and that simple lunch were about to collide in a way he could never imagine. And the story of love, pride, and humility was only beginning. The following Friday, the office was unusually quiet. Most employees had left early for the weekend, leaving only the essential staff and a few cleaners, including Harold. He moved silently through the empty halls, mop in hand, leaving a path of polished floors behind him. Even in these quiet hours, Harold worked diligently, making sure the building looked perfect for Monday morning. Meanwhile, Thomas Royce stayed behind, buried in papers and reports. He had spent the week reviewing deals, signing contracts, and managing crises. Now, staring at a pile of documents, he realized he had forgotten lunch. His stomach growled and he frowned, irritated at himself. The expensive meals he usually ordered felt too formal and too much work. He wanted something simple, something quick. As he wandered the office, Thomas caught sight of Harold sitting alone in the break room again, opening his small tin box. The aroma of rice and beans mixed with grilled chicken drifted faintly through the air. Thomas stopped, arms crossed, watching Harold for a moment. A smirk formed on his face. "You're at it again, huh? That same little lunch?" Thomas said, his voice filled with amusement and condescension. "You really eat that every day? Don't you ever get tired of it?" Harold looked up slowly, his calm brown eyes meeting Thomas's sharp gaze. "It keeps me going, sir," he replied quietly, his tone steady but gentle. He did not flinch. He had learned long ago that pride and patience were stronger than anger. Thomas laughed, a short, sharp sound that echoed in the empty room. "I just don't understand how someone can be satisfied with that," he said, pointing vaguely at the tin. "It's simple, cheap, not even impressive." Harold's jaw tightened slightly, but he did not respond. Inside, he felt the familiar sting, but it was quickly replaced by a quiet, steadfast pride. The lunch in front of him was more than food, it was love. It was Maya, carefully preparing each meal, thinking of him, making sure he had strength and comfort for the long day ahead. No one else could see it. No one else could understand it. Thomas, noticing the silence, leaned closer. "Come on, Harold. Tell me the truth. You really enjoy this? Doesn't it bother you that it's so plain?" Harold smiled faintly, almost to himself. "Sometimes the simplest things are the most meaningful," he said softly. The words were quiet, almost lost in the hum of the fluorescent lights, but Thomas caught them. For a brief moment he paused, puzzled by the calm confidence in Harold's voice. At that exact moment, Harold's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, saw a message from Maya, and smiled openly. "She says hello," he said, holding the phone close to his chest. Thomas noticed the expression on Harold's face, the warmth, the love, the connection. He didn't understand it at first, but he could feel that there was something different here. Something deeper than money or status or appearances. Curiosity got the better of Thomas. Who sends you messages about your lunch?" he asked cautiously. Harold chuckled softly. "It's my daughter. She cooks this for me every day," he said simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Thomas blinked, unable to hide his surprise. He stared at the simple tin in Harold's hands, realizing for the first time that this cheap, unimpressive lunch had a story, a meaning, a human touch he had completely ignored. The arrogance that had defined him for decades faltered for a split second. He had mocked the food, mocked Harold without knowing anything about it. Harold, sensing the pause in Thomas's usual arrogance, quietly returned to his meal, savoring each bite. Thomas watched him, uneasy but strangely captivated. He wondered how someone could find joy, comfort, and strength in something so simple, something so small. For the first time, he felt a twinge of humility, a crack in the armor of pride he had carried for so long. The quiet encounter ended without further words. Thomas left the room pretending to be busy, but inside his mind was racing. The image of Harold eating the simple lunch with love in his eyes stayed with him. He realized that he had judged too quickly, too harshly. Something about the scene unsettled him, something he could not name yet. As Harold finished the last bite of rice and closed the tin carefully, he felt a small sense of satisfaction. The day had been like any other, but the tiny exchange, the recognition, even unspoken, reminded him that love and care were far more powerful than wealth, pride, or mockery. Little did he know, this small moment would set the stage for a revelation that would change everything. Thomas Royce's pride, Harold's life, and the story of that humble lunch forever. It was late on a Wednesday evening when Thomas Royce stayed behind in the office again. The sun had set hours ago, and the city outside glimmered with lights reflecting off the glass towers like stars fallen to the ground. Thomas was buried in a pile of contracts, balance sheets, and reports. He had promised himself he would finish everything before leaving, but exhaustion weighed heavily on him. His stomach growled, reminding him he had skipped dinner again. In his distracted state, Thomas reached for a cup of coffee, not noticing the papers stacked haphazardly on the edge of the desk. A sudden slip sent the steaming coffee tipping over, spilling across the documents. Thomas froze, horror flashing across his face. These were important contracts, some worth millions. A single stain could ruin everything. Panic rose in his chest. He grabbed a handful of tissues and tried to blot the mess, but it was too late. Coffee had seeped into the pages, leaving dark, permanent stains. Thomas cursed under his breath, pacing the office like a caged lion. Just then, Harold appeared quietly at the door, mop in hand. He had been finishing up the last floors, making sure the office was spotless. He paused when he saw Thomas's panic. "Sir, do you need some help?" he asked gently. His calm voice was a stark contrast to Thomas's frantic movements. I don't know if it's salvageable," Thomas muttered, frustration and fear mixing in his voice. "These are contracts worth millions. They're ruined." Harold approached slowly, kneeling beside the papers. "Let me see," he said softly. He picked up a small cloth from his cleaning cart and began dabbing carefully at the stained pages. Thomas watched, tense, unsure if Harold's efforts would matter at all. Minutes passed. Harold worked methodically, quietly, almost like an artist restoring a painting. He had cleaned offices for years, handled accidents and solved problems no one else noticed. But Thomas had never stopped to see him, had never realized the skill and care Harold possessed. Now as Harold's hands moved with precision, Thomas felt something unfamiliar. "Aw, sir," Harold said finally, standing and dusting his hands off. "These should be okay. Most of the stains are gone and the papers are readable. You're lucky I was here." Thomas stared at him, speechless. For the first time, he saw Harold not as a janitor to be mocked, but as someone capable, reliable, and quietly extraordinary. He remembered the tin lunch he had mocked days ago. How wrong he had been. How blind his pride had made him. Harold straightened, brushing off his uniform, a calm smile on his face. "Sometimes the little things matter the most. It's easy to miss them if you only look at what's obvious," he said, his words carrying an unexpected weight. Thomas swallowed hard. He felt small, humbled, and a strange mix of shame and gratitude washed over him. Thomas finally found his voice, quiet and hesitant. I never realized you did all this without anyone noticing, and you saved these papers. How did I never see?" Harold shrugged gently. "I do my job, sir. I care about what I do. That's all. That's what matters to me." For a moment, Thomas simply watched him, the arrogant millionaire stripped of his usual confidence. He realized that Harold's life was not defined by money or titles but by quiet dignity, careful effort and love for the people who mattered, like his daughter, Maya. That thought struck Thomas harder than any business lesson ever could. Later that night, Thomas returned to his office, sitting silently in his chair. The cleaned contracts lay before him, saved by Harold's careful hands. He thought about the tin lunch, the daughter who lovingly prepared it, and the man who had taught him more in a few minutes than any seminar or book ever could. Pride, Thomas realized, was fragile. Humility, respect, and recognition, those were what truly mattered. Harold quietly returned to his cleaning duties, unaware of the storm of reflection he had triggered in Thomas. Yet that small act of care, saving coffee-stained papers in the dead of night, had begun to shift something profound in the millionaire's heart. Thomas's mocking words about lunch, his arrogance and his pride were beginning to crumble, replaced by something unfamiliar: respect. Little did Thomas know The story of that humble janitor and the lunch he had mocked was far from over. What began as a small act of care would soon become a revelation that would change Thomas's life forever, and it would begin with the secret behind that lunch and the daughter who made it with love. The following week, the company held a charity event in the main hall. The place was filled with tables, colorful decorations, and the smell of food from every corner. Employees buzzed around, serving dishes, arranging chairs, and ensuring everything was perfect. Thomas Royce walked through the hall, dressed in his finest suit, his face composed but his mind distracted. He was supposed to be enjoying the event, mingling with clients and guests, but his thoughts kept drifting to Harold and that simple lunch he had mocked days ago. As he passed by the catering area, Thomas noticed a young woman moving gracefully among the tables. She carried platters, spoke softly to the staff, and arranged food with meticulous care. There was something about her presence, calm, confident, warm, that caught his attention. He paused for a moment, staring. Her hands moved with skill, and every detail she touched seemed to glow. "Excuse me," Thomas said, approaching her. "Are you helping with the catering?" The young woman looked up, smiling brightly. "Yes, sir, I'm volunteering today. We're preparing meals for the charity." Her voice was gentle, but it carried strength and kindness. Thomas hesitated for a moment, then asked almost impulsively, You don't work here, do you?" She shook her head, laughing softly. "No, sir, I just wanted to help. Cooking has always been my passion. I love making meals for people, and today I get to share that with everyone." Something about her voice, her smile, and the way she handled the food sparked a memory in Thomas. The simple lunch in the tin box, the aroma of rice, beans, and chicken. The quiet man, Harold, who had always sat alone in the corner. He suddenly felt a jolt of realization. Could it be— "Wait," Thomas said, stepping closer, trying to control his sudden nervousness. "Your name is—" "Maya," she replied, still smiling. "Maya Johnson." Thomas's heart skipped a beat. "Johnson? Harold Johnson? Your father is—" Maya's eyes lit up. "Yes, you know my father?" She seemed genuinely curious, not realizing Thomas had observed him for weeks. Thomas's throat tightened. I saw him with his lunch. The one well, I shouldn't have said anything about it. I mocked it. I didn't know it was yours." Maya's smile softened. "Oh," she said gently. "That lunch, I make it for him every day. I wake up early, cook it with care, and pack it for him. It's not fancy, but it's filled with love. That's what makes it special to us." Thomas felt a wave of shame wash over him. All the arrogance, all the mockery, all the pride he had carried. It felt meaningless compared to the love contained in that simple tin box. The realization hit him like a lightning bolt. He had judged Harold without understanding the story behind the meal, without seeing the love that made it so important. I can't believe it," Thomas whispered. "All this time, I didn't see it. I was wrong. I mocked him. I mocked you both without knowing anything." Maya reached out and touched his arm lightly. "It's okay. People don't always see the things that truly matter. My father, he works hard. He's kind. He does things quietly without anyone noticing. That's who he is. That's what makes him special." Thomas nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. He thought of the way Harold had saved his coffee-stained contracts, the quiet dignity with which he carried out his work, the respect he showed for everyone around him. And now, knowing Maya's role in that simple lunch, Thomas felt a deep sense of humility. He realized that no amount of money, no office, no power could replace the love and care of family, or the quiet strength of someone who lived with integrity. He looked at Maya, then toward the corner of the room where Harold was helping another staff member. For the first time, Thomas saw him, not just as a janitor, not just as a man to be mocked, but as a hero in his own right. A man whose life was built on love, respect, and quiet strength. Thomas took a deep breath. I need to apologize to him," he said softly. "And, I'd like to thank you as well, Maya. You taught me a lesson I'll never forget." Maya smiled, a mixture of warmth and quiet pride in her eyes. "Sometimes the smallest acts of love are the most powerful," she said gently, "and the world needs to see that more than anything." That moment stayed with Thomas long after the event ended. He walked away with a changed heart, a heart that finally understood the true meaning of respect, humility, and the invisible power of love. The story of a humble lunch had revealed more about life, humanity, and himself than any boardroom, any contract, or any fortune ever could. The following Monday, Thomas Royce arrived at the office with a heaviness in his chest. He had spent the weekend thinking about Harold, about the coffee-stained contracts, and about Maya's words during the charity event. The pride he had carried for decades now felt hollow compared to the warmth, care, and humility he had witnessed. He spotted Harold in the corner of the break room, quietly cleaning tables and organizing supplies. For weeks, Thomas had mocked him, ignored him, and judged him. Today, though, he wanted to make amends. His steps were slower than usual, almost hesitant as he approached the janitor quietly, unsure of how to start. "Harold," Thomas said softly, almost nervously. Harold looked up, surprised by the tone of the voice. He didn't recognize the usual arrogance. Instead, there was something different. Respect, humility, and a hint of vulnerability. I want to apologize," Thomas continued, struggling to find the right words. "I mocked you. I laughed at your lunch, and I judged you without understanding anything about your life, about the love behind it. That was wrong, and I am sorry." Harold blinked, taken aback. It was not often that anyone, let alone a millionaire like Thomas, admitted they were wrong. A small, quiet smile formed on his face. "Thank you, sir," he said simply. "That means more than you know." Thomas reached into his bag and pulled out a small lunchbox, neatly packed with sandwiches, fruit, and a note folded on top. I thought maybe you'd accept this. It's not much, but I wanted to show my appreciation," he said, his voice wavering slightly. Harold accepted the lunchbox with both hands, touched by the gesture. I don't know what to say," he whispered. For a man who had worked quietly for decades, rarely acknowledged or praised, this moment felt overwhelming. Thomas cleared his throat, feeling a mixture of embarrassment and sincerity. "You've taught me something I could never have learned from money, power, or success. You've shown me that love, care, and integrity matter more than anything. That lunch your daughter made, it wasn't just food, it was love. And it opened my eyes. I hope you can forgive me for being blind for so long." Harold's eyes glistened, a rare emotion breaking through his calm exterior. "Of course, sir. Everyone makes mistakes. What matters is that you learned something. That's all I could ever hope for." At that moment, Maya entered the break room, carrying another tray of freshly prepared meals for the staff. She noticed Thomas standing beside her father holding the lunchbox. Her eyes widened slightly, then softened into a smile. "Sir," she said gently. Thomas turned to her, nerves and gratitude mixing in his expression. "Maya, I want to thank you. Your lunches, your love, it taught me more than anything else ever could. I was wrong, and I wanted you to know that." Maya's smile brightened and she placed a hand lightly on her father's shoulder. "It's okay, sir. Love is meant to be shared, not judged. I'm glad you understand that now." For the first time, Thomas felt something he had rarely experienced: humility. He felt small yet profoundly connected to the people he had once looked down upon. Harold's quiet dignity, Maya's warmth, and the simple act of a lunch made with love had broken through the wall of arrogance Thomas had built around himself for decades. From that day on, Thomas made a conscious effort to change. He walked past Harold's corner and greeted him genuinely. He noticed the small things: a perfectly polished floor, a neatly arranged table, a kind word to a coworker. He began to see the people he had overlooked, not as servants or invisible staff, but as human beings with their own stories, struggles, and victories. Even the tiniest gesture, Harold's lunch, carefully made by Maya, reminded him daily that the world was bigger than his office, bigger than his wealth. There was love, there was kindness, and there was humility in places he had ignored for far too long. That simple act of a daughter's love had opened Thomas's heart. He realized that true wealth was not measured in money or status, but in respect, compassion, and understanding. And for the first time in his life, he understood what it truly meant to see another person, not for what they had or didn't have, but for who they truly were. Harold looked at Thomas, his quiet smile steady and calm, and knew something had shifted. Thomas Royce, the proud millionaire, was no longer the same man. And deep down he felt a sense of hope. Hope that even the hardest hearts could learn, change, and grow when confronted with love and humility. Weeks passed, and the office began to feel different. Not because the walls or floors had changed, but because something invisible had shifted. A quiet warmth, a sense of respect, and a subtle bond between people who had once lived in separate worlds. Thomas Royce, the millionaire who had once mocked Harold's lunch, walked through the corridors with a new awareness. He noticed the small things now: the janitor quietly tidying a spill, the receptionist greeting a client with a smile, the cafeteria staff arranging dishes with care. One afternoon, Thomas approached Harold while he was polishing the marble floors near the main lobby. Harold looked up, mildly surprised, and offered his usual calm nod. Thomas hesitated, then smiled genuinely. "Harold, would you join me for lunch today?" "My treat," he said, his voice softer than usual. Harold blinked, almost unsure if he heard correctly. "Me, sir?" he asked quietly. "Yes, you," Thomas replied, gesturing to a small cafe nearby. I want to talk. And more importantly, I want to thank you properly." Harold's smile was small but warm. He nodded, gathering his cleaning supplies. Maya, who had returned home after her morning shift at the office, saw her father leaving with Thomas and paused, curiosity sparkling in her eyes. "What's going on?" she whispered to herself, sensing something important was happening. At the cafe, the three sat together. Maya watched quietly as Thomas leaned forward, eyes sincere. "Harold, I've learned so much from you," he began. "From your work ethic, your patience, and your lunch. I was blind, proud, and foolish. I mocked something so simple because I didn't understand it. But now I see it, the care, the love, the meaning behind it. You've taught me something no amount of money ever could." Harold listened quietly, emotion flickering in his eyes. "Thank you, sir. That means more than you know," he said softly. Thomas looked at Maya, realizing the full circle of what he had missed. "And you, your daughter. She made that lunch with love. That love changed my perspective, my heart, and perhaps even my life. Thank you, Maya, truly." Maya smiled, feeling a quiet pride. "It wasn't for recognition, sir. I just wanted my father to feel cared for, but I'm glad it made a difference." Thomas's voice trembled slightly. "It's made more difference than you could ever imagine. I've been rich in money but poor in understanding. That's changing now, thanks to both of you." From that day, a bond formed between them. Thomas began involving Harold and Maya in small ways, asking their opinions on cafeteria menus, consulting Harold on office issues only a careful observer could notice, and even inviting Maya to share her culinary ideas for charity events. But more importantly, he treated them with respect, gratitude, and genuine admiration. Employees noticed the change. The millionaire who had once walked with arrogance now smiled, greeted people warmly, and acknowledged the quiet contributions of those around him. It became a story the office whispered about, the man who had learned humility from a janitor's lunch. Months later, the story reached beyond the office. Thomas shared it during interviews and conferences, speaking not of wealth or deals, but of respect, love, and the invisible lessons in life. The richest people I've ever met, he said, aren't the ones in the boardroom. They're those who work quietly, love deeply, and carry integrity in their hearts. My janitor, Harold, and his daughter Maya taught me that. Harold and Maya smiled quietly whenever they heard Thomas speak. They didn't seek attention, but the recognition felt meaningful, a testament to the power of love and humility. That simple tin lunch, once mocked, had become a symbol of respect, learning, and transformation. On a quiet Friday afternoon, Thomas walked past Harold and saw him smiling while polishing the floor. He stopped, looked at the man he once underestimated, and said with a grin, "Lunch tomorrow, my treat. And this time I promise I won't mock it." Harold laughed softly, a sound full of warmth. "I'll hold you to that, sir," he replied. And as Thomas walked away, he realized something profound. Money could buy almost anything, but it could never buy the lessons he had learned from a father's love, a daughter's care, and a humble lunch that carried more meaning than all his wealth combined. It was a story people could hardly believe, a millionaire humbled by a janitor and a simple meal, but it was real. And for Thomas, Harold, and Maya, it became a memory, a lesson, and a bond that would last a lifetime. The world might never know the depth of that simple tin, but its power had changed hearts forever.